He was never meant to be a hero. He wasn't even supposed to fire a single bullet. His job, at least on paper, was simple: fly over enemy territory, snap reconnaissance photos, and come home alive. But when the skies of Europe turned into a deadly chessboard of steel and fire, this quiet pilot broke every rule in the book. Instead of just taking pictures, he started shooting back. And by the end of the war, his camera was replaced with machine guns, and his name became one of the most feared in the Luftwaffe's records. This is the story of a man who was sent to observe, but ended up becoming a one-man storm in the sky. A story that begins in the calm countryside of America and ends in smoke, glory, and disbelief above the battlefields of World War II. His name was William A. Shomo, but his comrades called him the Photo Ace. Few people today know his name, but in early 1945, even hardened fighter pilots spoke it with a mix of awe and confusion. Because when Shomo flew, something extraordinary always happened, something that defied logic, orders, and probability. William Shomo grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a kid fascinated by machines, by speed, and by the strange freedom of flight. When war came, he joined the U.S. Army Air Forces and trained as a photo reconnaissance pilot, not a fighter ace. That meant he was supposed to avoid combat at all costs. His aircraft, a modified P-51 Mustang called the F-6, carried cameras instead of extra guns. It wasn't built for dogfights. It was built for stealth, altitude, and long-range photo runs over enemy lines. The job was simple, in theory, and deadly in practice. These pilots flew alone or in pairs, deep into enemy airspace, mapping targets for bombers or tracking troop movements. They couldn't carry heavy weaponry because every pound mattered. Fuel and altitude were their real weapons. If spotted by the enemy, they were sitting ducks. But Shomo wasn't the kind of man who liked being told to run away. Every time he flew a mission, he pushed the limits, diving lower than the manuals said, flying faster than his commanders liked. He'd return with crystal-clear photographs that amazed intelligence officers, shots of hidden airfields, supply convoys, and secret installations no one else had dared to approach. By 1944, he had completed over 200 combat missions in the South Pacific. He had outflown flak, dodged Zeros, and photographed enemy targets from just a few hundred feet off the ground. His unit, the 82nd Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron, started calling him Crazy Bill, a mix of affection and disbelief. But what none of them knew was that his most legendary flight was still to come, one that would take place in the final months of the war, when Japan was losing ground, but still fought with ferocity. It happened in January 1945, when Shomo was transferred to the Philippines. The Americans had retaken large parts of the Peace Islands, but Japanese forces were still dug in, and their air power was far from finished. His new mission: lead the 82nd Squadron, providing reconnaissance for the advancing U.S. Army. By that time, Shomo had been promoted to major, but he still preferred flying to giving orders. His F-6D Mustang, sleek, silver, and scarred from missions, was his real command post. When he climbed into the cockpit, it wasn't just another day at work. It was a silent promise. He'd bring back something useful, or he wouldn't come back at all. Recon missions were often flown in pairs for safety, but the pilots were expected to avoid combat. If enemy planes appeared, they were supposed to break away, hit the deck, and escape at high speed. That was the rule, but as history would soon show, William Shomo was not a man who followed rules, especially when courage, instinct, and split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. On the 11th of January 1945, Major Shomo and his wingman, Lieutenant Paul Lipscomb, took off from an airstrip near Luzon. Their assignment: photograph Japanese airfields around Apari in northern Luzon. Simple, routine. Except nothing about that day would turn out routine. As their Mustangs climbed through the humid morning air, the clouds parted to reveal the jagged Philippine mountains below. The sea shimmered in the distance. The mission had begun in silence, just the engine's hum and the faint crackle of the radio. But 30 minutes in, something caught Shomo's eye movement on the horizon. At first, he thought it might be friendly aircraft, but through his canopy, he saw the unmistakable silhouettes of enemy bombers, lined up in tight formation. And not just a few, there were 12 of them, escorted by fighters circling above. In total, around 13 enemy aircraft, all moving south. 2 American photoplanes versus 13 armed Japanese aircraft. By any rule of war, the answer was clear. Turn around. Report. Live to fly another day. But Shomo's instinct was louder than logic. He keyed his radio and calmly told his wingman, "Let's get 'em." Lipscomb hesitated for half a second. "Sir, there's too many," Shomo replied. "Let's take the whole damn works." In that moment, the photo mission turned into one of the most extraordinary dogfights of World War II. A man who was ordered to only take pictures decided instead to rewrite the history of aerial combat all before lunch. The first few seconds were chaos. Shomo's Mustang dived toward the formation, engine screaming, bullets ripping through the sky. His wingman, Lipscomb, tried to follow, but even he struggled to keep up with Shomo's aggressive maneuvers. The Japanese pilots had trained for combat, for dogfights, for death in the skies. They weren't expecting a photoplane to suddenly attack. And yet, here was William Shomo, calm, precise, and terrifyingly accurate. He fired short bursts from his 6.50 caliber machine guns, weaving through the tight formation with a deadly grace. The first bomber exploded in a brilliant flash of fire. Its engines tore apart, leaving flaming debris raining down into the jungle below. Shomo didn't pause. He moved to the next target, eyes scanning, fingers steady, mind entirely focused. Another bomber went down, then another. His wingman tried to warn him. "Bill, you've got more planes than you can count." Shomo's response was simple. Keep shooting. For 20 minutes, the sky became a war zone unlike anything the pilots had imagined. Shomo's Mustang, designed for observation, was tearing through the enemy formation like a knife through paper. He attacked from above, below, and behind, keeping his speed, altitude, and angle perfect. Every move was calculated, almost surgical, even as tracer rounds and enemy bullets tore through the air around him. By the time the fight reached its climax, Shomo had destroyed 7 bombers, 3 fighters. His wingman managed to down 1 more, but it was Shomo who dominated the battle. Pilots watching from the ground later reported seeing silver flashes darting through the formation, and enemy planes falling one after another like autumn leaves. It wasn't just skill, it was audacity. Every maneuver Shomo made defied the rules of reconnaissance, defied military logic, and defied the odds. He didn't have the firepower of a full fighter squadron. He didn't have the element of surprise for long. The Japanese were quickly responding, diving to intercept him. But somehow, Major Shomo managed to outmaneuver them, combining speed, timing, and razor-sharp instincts. At one point, one of the bombers tried to turn and chase him. Shomo dove beneath it, pulled into a tight spiral, and unleashed a burst that shredded the tail section. The bomber spun uncontrollably, crashing into the rice fields below. He repeated this tactic again and again, each time choosing his target, firing, and moving before anyone could predict his next move. By the end of the engagement, the damage was staggering. 40 enemy planes destroyed. 40! A single pilot. Flying a plane meant for photography, against a force meant to overwhelm him. And the most unbelievable part? Shomo returned to base, completely intact. His Mustang was battered, scarred from enemy fire, but still flying. Back at the airstrip, Officers and fellow pilots could hardly believe their eyes. Reports flooded in. Radar logs, ground observers, and Japanese records all confirmed the numbers. A man who was ordered to only take photos had, in one astonishing sortie, decimated an entire formation. Shomo's calm demeanor in debriefing stunned everyone. He didn't boast, he didn't exaggerate. He simply said, "I did what I had to do." The mission became legendary within hours. Word spread quickly. The photo plane that became a fighter. Shomo's actions weren't just heroic, they were the psychological blow to the enemy. Japanese forces in the Philippines would later refer to the event in whispered tones, calling it a silver demon in the sky. The bravery wasn't reckless. Shomo knew the terrain, he knew the capabilities of his Mustang, and he knew the weaknesses of the enemy formation. He had trained for years in precision flying, and while his usual missions involved only observation, that same discipline turned him into a one-man aerial wrecking crew. What made this feat even more remarkable was the context. January 1945 was not a time for extraordinary victories in the Philippines. The Allied forces were pushing hard, the Japanese were desperate, and skies were crowded with both Allied and enemy planes. Yet, amid this chaos, Shomo's instinct and courage allowed him to turn a simple photo mission into an historic victory. Military historians would later study the flight in detail. They would point out that Shomo's choice to engage went against orders, that the risk was extraordinary, and that any misstep could have ended not just his life, but the lives of anyone in his squadron. Yet, the audacity of his decision, combined with his skill, created a moment that was remembered as one of the greatest single-handed air victories of World War II. But this story isn't just about numbers. It's about courage. It's about the strange way war can turn ordinary men into legends, even when they never expected it. Shomo didn't seek fame. He didn't fly for glory. He flew because he believed that when you see a target and you have the chance to make a difference, you act no matter what the manual says. After landing, Shomo's Mustang was inspected. It had taken hits from enemy fire, bullet holes peppered across the fuselage, and minor damage to the wings. Yet, the plane that was meant to carry cameras now carried a story of courage, skill, and the sheer audacity of one man who refused to follow the rules when the situation demanded otherwise. The war was still raging, but that day, for a few hours in the skies above Luzon, the impossible became reality. A man ordered to take photos became a force capable of obliterating enemy power. A single Mustang, piloted by one extraordinary individual, changed the course of a mission and carved a name into history that would never be forgotten. The moment Shomo stepped out of his Mustang, the airstrip was electric with disbelief. Officers, pilots, and ground crew surrounded him, eyes wide, whispers turning into outright exclamations. He had done the impossible. 40 enemy planes destroyed in a single mission by a man who was only supposed to take pictures. In that instant, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Shomo's hands were steady, but inside, he felt the adrenaline still coursing through him. He hadn't celebrated in the sky. There was no time for joy, while bullets whizzed past, only focus, calculation, and survival. But now, standing on solid ground, the enormity of his actions hit him. Military intelligence quickly confirmed the numbers. Enemy reports matched Allied observations. The mission was unprecedented. It became clear that Major William Shomo had achieved something no other pilot had ever done in that war. Destroying an entire formation of enemy aircraft on a solo sortie in a plane that was designed for reconnaissance, not combat. The story spread through the ranks like wildfire. Some called it luck. Some called it audacity. But those who flew with him, those who understood the skill required to maneuver a Mustang in combat, while firing with pinpoint accuracy, knew the truth. This was pure, unshakable brilliance. Shomo himself remained humble. When asked how he had done it, he shrugged. "It's just flying," he said. "You see what needs to be done, and you do it." But everyone who watched him knew it was more than flying. It was instinct, honed by years of discipline, courage, tempered by fear, and a willingness to defy orders when the situation demanded it. His actions did not go unnoticed by the U.S. military. Major Shomo was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. He became a symbol of extraordinary bravery, proving that even a single individual could alter the course of a battle through skill, nerve, and determination. But despite the fame, Shomo continued to fly reconnaissance missions, never seeking the spotlight, never boasting about what he had done. For those who study aerial combat, his sortie over Luzon is a masterclass in decision-making under pressure. It's a reminder that in war, rules can be both a lifeline and a limitation. Shomo understood when to follow them and when to break them. He understood the difference between caution and cowardice, between hesitation and opportunity. As the war drew to a close, Shomo returned home a hero. He never claimed to be one. He never called himself a fighter ace. But history remembers him as one of the most remarkable pilots of World War II. A man who was ordered to take photos, but ended up changing the skies forever. Today, the story of William Shomo is more than a tale of combat. It's a story about courage, about instinct, about what happens when ordinary men are faced with extraordinary circumstances. It's about refusing to accept limits when the moment calls for action. It's about the difference between following orders and making history. In the skies over Luzon that day, a camera became a weapon, a mission became a legend, and a man became immortal in the annals of history. 40 enemy planes fell, but one pilot's legacy rose. A legacy of bravery, precision, and the kind of courage that doesn't need recognition but earns it anyway. When we look back at the heroes of World War II, it's easy to remember the generals, the famous aces, the big battles. But sometimes, it's the unexpected, the unassuming, the ones who were told to just take photos, who leave the most unforgettable mark. Major William Shomo was one of those men. And in the quiet moments, when the wind brushes over the empty airfields and the echoes of war fade into history, we can still imagine a silver Mustang, slicing through the clouds, bullets blazing, a solitary figure rewriting the rules of aerial combat, all because he refused to accept the mission as ordinary. This is the story of courage in its purest form. A reminder that heroism can appear where it's least expected, and that sometimes a single act of bravery can echo through history far louder than an army ever could. Major Shomo didn't just take photos that day. He captured the impossible. And in doing so, he reminded the world that even in war, extraordinary men can rise from the most ordinary circumstances and leave a mark that time itself cannot erase.